going to throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there. Touchdown. Touchdown, Carolina. The pistol. Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win. And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it. 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always. And tonight, we are getting ready to update you on the latest news and notes coming out from around Tar Heel fall camp. Some important notes, including a significant injury for Carolina, again, along the offensive line, that could put Carolina at risk going into week one of the season. It's the interior of the offensive line, so certainly not great news there. We'll tell you about that. And then update you on some of the other news and notes that are coming out from around camp as well. So plenty of great stuff here on this edition of the podcast here. Wanted to get on here before the Carolina Panthers, of course, take the field for their final preseason game, just in case you guys are going to the game or something like that. But hopefully if you are, you're listening to this edition of the podcast on your way to the stadium here as we update you on the latest going on with the Tar Heels, who are now, getting ready to wrap up camp and begin practice and start getting prepared for the game against TCU. You know, Bill Belichick was meeting with the media yesterday. He brought that up and was talking a little bit about how preparations are going to begin for TCU here in the coming days. And Carolina is going to have to do it without one of their top contributors, they're hoping, along the offensive line this year. And then we're not talking about Austin Blaske. We already know that he's out. He's out up to 4 games for Carolina. They're expecting to or hoping to have him back for the game against Clemson. But this time, Christo Kelly now is dealing with some sort of injury. I've known this for the last few days. It officially got confirmed today by Tar Heel 24/7 that he has been out for at least a week now, and it is an unknown injury. They do not know what the severity of it is. And at this point, there is no timetable for his return. So, Josh Marlowe, you hear that. Now Carolina down 2 interior offensive linemen. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it puts I'm not going to say a damper on the preseason, but I think it makes that challenge against TCU that much harder, assuming if Christo Kelly is not ready to go, because these were 2 guys that we expected to either start or play significant snaps in the opener. And with this offense going to be, a new look offense under Freddie Kitchens, we thought they would maybe want to run the ball, really kind of just control that game at the line of scrimmage. Going into that without potentially these 2 guys makes the task that much harder for Carolina to come away with the win. It's not impossible. It just means that really the talent and really the depth of this room is going to be tested right out of the gate. Usually you maybe wait till you get to the end of the first month or whatever to have your first significant injury up front. Carolina has 2. We haven't taken a snap yet. So that really it reinforces the importance of depth at up front, something Carolina has struggled to do in years past. And I think I'm confident in saying that if this team is going to win and compete at the level that folks are talking about them being able to do so, they'll do it because their offensive line's in better shape to handle the injuries in years past. Because in years past, this group would not be able to overcome 2 injuries this significant, whether it was in the preseason or during the season. And so we're going to learn a lot about this group right out of the gate in about 9 days against TCU.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're going to learn a lot about the depth of this group, and that's what sucks, is that we're already having to learn about that because this group is just so banged up. I mean, with Blasky out, you would imagine that if he was healthy, he would just slide in there at center for you. I mean, he did a really good job there last year, and so Carolina would have been comfortable with where they were at. You would have had to start probably Daniel King at guard, but hey, Carolina would have been able to navigate that. Now, with both of these guys out, now you're looking at a scenario where they're more than likely going to have to convert someone from one of the other positions to center. The rumors that are coming out are that it's going to be Chad Lindbergh who's going to make that conversion over from the tackle spots to play center. That is a position that he has not played at the college level. He's only played tackle. And the thing is that, the early returns on him taking snaps, according to Inside Carolina, is that a lot of his snaps have been inaccurate, especially when they've gone into the shotgun. So he's having some issues there already. The only other option that you have, a guy that has played center before, is former walk-on turned scholarship player, Bo Burks. And is that an option that you go with? A former walk-on? Is he someone that you feel comfortable rolling out there for the first game of the season against TCU? Last year, it would have been over. Carolina would have had absolutely no chance of winning the first game of the season if they suffered 2 injuries like this along the offensive line. This year, the one thing that they did was they went out and got so many experienced guys that you think they have a chance. Now, again, I think what you would do is you're going to start with Lindbergh at center. If this ends up being the case, we're hoping Christo Kelly can get back. The one thing to note is that even though he is out indefinitely and there is no timetable for his return, this could just be them being cautious and not wanting to give up a ton of information. So it could be one of those things where once we get closer to game week, they could be just holding him out and he could end up on the injury report as probable. And all of a sudden Carolina has their starting center. Not saying that's impossible, but it seems like right now they have to prepare for the worst case scenario. That's what you're hoping Carolina is doing right now. And so that means getting Chad Lindbergh ready. I would probably say he's going to be the guy that's going to start out there, but I know he's a former walk-on. I'm not afraid to go to Bo Burks if you have to. If that's what you end up having to do, I think at some point in the game, this staff will do that. If Lindbergh is struggling that much, they're going to look for someone that can at least get snaps off and do, give them some effort at that position. And you never know what is ultimately going to happen, but it's far from ideal. Carolina's already facing the challenges of that. And one guy that hopefully can be able to help them a little bit with the challenges that they are now facing is a guy that's converting over from the defensive line. News came out earlier this afternoon from Tar Heel 24/7 that you do have Peter Pisansky, who is coming over from the defensive line and is joining the interior of the offensive line, would be my belief, because he is a guy that hopefully they are going to be able to have, at some point, you'd imagine, get out there and play some significant snaps with some of these guys along the offensive line, whether it's the first team, whether it's the second team. They may have to work him in. And I'm thinking, considering he was an interior defensive lineman with the need for interior offensive line help, I would feel like hopefully that is where Carolina is going to aim to go by bringing him over to that side of the ball.
Yeah, that would make the most sense. Given where he has learned, studied on the defensive side of the ball, knows how to attack, interior offensive linemen. So, okay, now you just kind of flip your mindset and then figure out how to play that side of the football and play to your strengths. I think this is where you got to be really grateful that this TCU game falls on a Monday, where you have an extra 2 days as compared to what most teams will have next week to their season openers to get this offensive line ready to go. Whether it's a guy like Pizanski that you're bringing over from the defensive side of the football, whether it's a guy like Bo Burks who's a former walk-on, it's really all hands on deck and really doing as much as you can to coach that offensive line up and have as many bodies ready to go. Be difference makers for you against TCU, because there's probably going to be a scenario or two where maybe a guy gets injured, a guy gets tired, and now you're really having to mix match some offensive line units that you probably didn't expect to see going into the season, let alone in the first game of the year. So this is probably less than ideal when you're 2 weeks away from the opener, when you're going to convert linemen to play on the offensive side of the football. This is when you gave Bill Belichick the big buck. This is why you signed off on him putting together the staff that he wanted and wanted to be able to compensate, was to go out there and get the most out of the roster that he assembled. And unfortunately, that has really come probably a lot sooner than we thought it was going to here in his first year in Chapel Hill. But if there's a coach that you could trust to do this in this short turnaround, do Belichick the benefit of the we'll kind of trust to make sure that Pizanski will be ready to play no matter what kind of role that is. If this was happening under Mac Brown with some of the offensive line coaches that he employed, this would be disaster for Carolina. And it may turn out to be a disaster when we get to that season opener. But right now, with a little bit over a week until you get to that game, I think you got to that the game's on a Monday, because I think you trust that these guys will be better prepared. But it has happened under Mac Brown staff.
Yeah, I mean, look, I want to make it clear that while they have converted Pizanski over, it does not by any stretch mean that he is going to be a guy that is going to have to play significant minutes for or significant snaps for Carolina in the first game of the season. I don't know if that's going to happen. I think he might just be a guy that ends up backing up for Carolina, could be further down the depth chart. I mean, look, there's still guys like Byron Nelson, Trey Blue, that are true freshmen who have been with the team since the spring that would probably be ahead of him on the depth chart. This is just a guy that they're hoping to put another body in that room and hope that he can at least help the depth there in case there is, God forbid, a few more injuries in that room. I think for the most part, this is a move that isn't going to affect you on game day one, but it could affect you further down the line. And who knows, maybe Pizanski ends up really surprising people and coming out of nowhere. You just really never know with that. But it is, significant news when a guy changes sides of the ball. And the more significant thing is that I think this shows you that it wasn't really working out for him at defensive tackle. I had him as a guy when I did the position previews. I thought he was going to be a guy that would emerge as the backup to probably not the nose tackle, but the other defensive tackle position. I thought that was where he was probably going to emerge this season, just based off of what he was coming out of high school. Well, he was surpassed on the depth chart by Leroy Jackson. Carolina went out and got 3 other guys that are ahead of him in the 2 deep out of the transfer portal. And there probably are other guys like Devin Ankrum and some of the other freshmen that have probably already passed him on the depth chart. And so he said, look, I'll go over to the offensive side of the ball. You got to commend him for being willing to do that. I think that certainly is something that's a little bit tough, especially when you're recruited by one staff out of high school to play a certain position, and then another staff says, hey, let's try you at another spot. Or, it could be one of those scenarios where he suggested it. But either way, I like to see the work ethic from the young man. It's just now, okay, does he find a way to stick on that offensive side of the ball and make waves there? Some of the other news that's coming out, we'll finish up with the offensive line here, because this is probably the biggest piece of news that has come out, or some of the biggest intel that has come out from inside Carolina. And they posted this yesterday. This was during their practice viewing that they were allowed, the media was allowed, I think it was around 15 to 20 minutes again of being able to view practice. But one thing that they were able to get a really good look at least Adam Smith of Inside Carolina was the offensive line groups and how they were running. And it looks like the first team offensive line group for right now is Aiden Buchanan, the true freshman summer enrollee that we did not really talk about at all when we previewed the offensive line. Did not think we would have to really talk about him because of the fact that you had Miles McVay, that you had Trevion Green, guys that we thought probably would be starting for Carolina this year along that offensive front, had been starters, it appeared, earlier in fall camp, but no longer appears to be the case. Daniel King is going to be the left guard for Carolina as of right now. Chad Lindbergh at center, Aiden Banfield at right guard, and Ja'Kai Moore at right tackle. This is certainly not the starting group that we thought we were going to see for Carolina. That was the group that was out there on Wednesday, though, and it seems more and more possible with some of the buzz that we're hearing from around fall practice, that this is going to be the group that could take the field on that first Saturday against TCU. Part of this is because of the fact that you don't have Austin Blaschke as well as Christo Kelly, but that really only affects the interior of the offensive line, which I don't think is really the shock. It's more of what's going on at the offensive tackle spots.
Yeah, you don't see Trevion Green's name listed on either side, whether it was at left or right tackle. And then, as you mentioned, you got a guy he did not spend a whole lot of time talking he's going to pull left tackle. The guy, he's not being a blindside protector for Gio Lopez or Max Johnson because you got a left-handed quarterback. But nonetheless, I think that speaks volumes, I think, about him, where he comes in the summer and in 2.5 weeks or so has done enough to could maybe find himself starting in the first game of his college career against a big on the big stage of the weekend by the Tar Heels on Labor Day night. So I think you look at it as twofold, where I think this is probably trusting Belichick and this staff to put guys on the field that have earned the right to be out there. They're not just going to play because there's they've got experience, seniority, or whatever. But what does this say for a guy like Trevion Green, who we have had our concerns and our doubts about him, but would also like to have the experience out there, maybe as this offense maybe tries to find its foot. As you mentioned, the offensive line looks different because of the injuries. But if you would have told me this was what the tackle position would look like for Carolina going into the potential season opener, I would have raised both my eyebrows at the same time and turned my head sideways, because that was never once on my radar. I know it was not on your radar. So I'll have to see what this spells for Carolina. You still got over a week before you get to that opener, but nonetheless, this was not the starting five none of us expected to see in the first game of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely stunning, to say the least. If you told me that one of the true freshmen started along the offensive line, I would have told you, okay, Trey Blue or Byron Nelson, most likely Trey Blue, because I think he has the size to be able to kick out to tackle and play there and be successful. I would have never guessed that it would have been Aiden Buchanan. And maybe I'm overestimating or underestimating a guy that, at his size should be able to come in and make an impact. I mean, he's 6'9", 330 pounds. So there is no question that he has got the size. He's ready in that area. The question was, is he a guy coming out of the high school ranks that's really going to be able to make an early impact? I mean, this guy was ranked outside of the top 1,300 in terms of rankings coming out of high school. And you could say, well, how much stock do you really put into that kind of stuff? It's a fair point. I mean, you go back a year prior, Carolina was doing the same thing with another 3-star prospect, a guy that was ranked outside of the top 800 in Aiden Banfield. And it worked out decently well for them. He's a guy that, I think if Carolina had everybody healthy, from what I've seen, I don't believe that he would be a starter, but he would be a significant part of Carolina's offensive line again this year after being a starter for them last year. This is one of those guys that I think I like the fact that Bill Belichick and his staff are overlooking the year that is next to a guy's name and saying, look, We're not worried about what year you are. We're not worried about even how long you've been here. We're looking for guys, as he said in the press conference the other day, that are showing us the most improvement. And I guess that Aiden Buchanan is one of those guys that has shown the most improvement. When I watched him coming out of high school, he's exactly what you would expect from a guy of his size. He's an absolute mauler in the run game that overpowers edge rushers because of just how strong he is, especially in the upper body. He has some solid pass protection reps and, pretty quality footwork and lateral movement. But the thing that's going to scare you about him is when he goes up against the squattier edge rushers, the guys that can really bend a corner and get to the quarterback. How is he going to be able to stay in front of those guys? Because as we know, the low man wins in football. And when he is 6'9", it is really hard to be the low man. So I think that's going to be really interesting to monitor with him. I'm not against a true freshman starting along the offensive line, especially if that is the best option for Carolina. And to me, I'm going to trust a guy like Bill Belichick to make that type of decision for Carolina. I mean, hell, I even trusted Mac Brown to make that decision last year when he made it with Aiden Banfield. And it turned out that was probably the right move. Carolina didn't really have many other options along the offensive line. And I'm going to tell you, none of them would have been better than Aiden Banfield was at left guard last year. So I'm going to trust Bill Belichick, who I trust even more than Mac Brown, to go ahead and throw Aiden Buchanan in there and just see what ends up happening. The other thing is that just like with Chad Lindbergh, I have the belief that if we see Buchanan in there early on in the game, and let's say he just struggles that much, he's looking absolutely terrible, he's getting beat to the quarterback over and over again, he's letting up pressures, I think at some point Carolina would say, okay, let's get him out of there. Let's get another offensive tackle in here. Maybe we throw Trevion Green in there, a guy that's been with the first team unit for a lot of this time. Maybe we throw a Miles McVay in there, just something different. That's why I think I feel a little bit more secure about this decision along the offensive line than I would have felt last year if you were doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, you know that Belichick's not going to play anyone unless they've earned the right to be on the field. And the challenge that offensive line coaches are to find their best five and play their best five, regardless of name, regardless of how long they've been in school. And so I think that it really does speaks volumes about him that, as we mentioned, he showed up in the summer. They've been in camp just a little bit over 2 weeks. And he's, I think, from what was reported from inside Carolina earlier this week, he's on track to start in the first game of the season. And so it probably tells you that, as you mentioned, with his strength being in the run game, that's going to be the focal point, the identity of what Carolina's offensive line is going to be. I would imagine the first month or so of the season, as the season moves along, we expect Gio Lopez or Max John more comfortable. Carolina becomes more explosive in the passing game, but if they can find guys that can get their hands on defensive linemen and move them and put them where they want to go and open up lanes for the running game, I think those guys will get on the field more because I think Carolina wants to run the ball, control the clock with the way some of their games fall early in the season. So I think it's going to be probably one of the stories to watch as camp comes to a close and we get to actual TCU camp, and be mindful of when we're in the stadium to see who the starting five offensive line is when we get to that moment. I think this will be fluid. I don't think, I think Carolina will rotate during the game. And as we know with Belichick, like just because you start week one doesn't mean you start week two. Just because you start week one, week two doesn't mean you start week three. So be interested to see how this lineup, I think, evolves in the short term and in the long term as you get some guys back on the interior that are injured right now. But nonetheless, I think you still got to feel comfortable with where this offensive line is considering the injuries with this coaching staff, as opposed to maybe some of the previous coaching staffs that were never able to develop, any sort of depth up front on the offensive line.
Yeah. And I think, to me, the guy that I'm even more concerned about is Ja'Kai Moore. I think for him, we kind of know what he is at this point. He's a guy that, has the experience. He's played in 44 games, started 28 of those, and he's done them, at so many different positions. 13 at left tackle, 7 at left guard, 4 at right guard, and 4 at right tackle. The thing about him is that the last time that we saw him, which was as a senior in 2023, he split time between the 2 guard spots. Actually split time at all 4 spots, but most of his snaps were at the 2 guard spots. Didn't grade out well, has allowed a lot of quarterback pressures in the last 2 years that we've seen him. To me, I was hoping that somebody else would be able to emerge here. Maybe a Miles McVay. Maybe they run it back with Trevion Green there, even though he's the blindside guy. But who knows? Maybe Ja'Kai Moore is really the solution there. I'm a little bit worried about him being out there at tackle, but this is certainly one of those names that I guess we've got to get familiar with, even though he was looking like a guy that might be a backup for Carolina. We're seeing other guys that we thought were going to be able to step up at the position. A guy like Will Osteen, he's running with the second team at guard right now. So I think some of those options that we thought were going to be able to come in that Carolina got out of the spring transfer window, I think this is a guy that we didn't talk enough about, and he's probably going to be the starter when Carolina faces TCU next Monday in Kenan Stadium.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So I don't know, man. I think it's going to be interesting to see just what shakes out there. How much help do they maybe give him on that side?
Mm-hmm.
Do you it's something that I complained a lot about. Do you put a tight end over there just to help him chip, whether it's in the run game or the passing game? As much as we complained and lamented about Trevion Green, I just thought we'd see him somewhere on the starting offensive line. And that's not the way that it's looking right now. Could change by the time we get to TCU. Maybe it's something that he'll be a rotation piece. But I think that's the thing is with all the injuries, with some of the guys you have already lost, I would have thought you'd have seen that guy up front. And right now that does not appear to be the case. And so I think that'll be a guy to maybe monitor here moving forward. Does he do enough to maybe get a starting role by the time we get to the opener, or at least maybe the first guy off the bench in rotation? Just because I really thought he'd be a starter, but it does not appear to be the case. But maybe they found a different role that's better suited for him with some of the emergence of Buchanan and Ja'Kai Moore.
Yeah, I think the thing to know if you are a Tar Heel fan is that we could come back on Wednesday of next week and it can be a completely different starting offensive line. Now, I don't know if that's going to be the case, but I think that's just how crazy this offensive line group is right now, how inconsistent the group is right now. It's the position I'm worried about the most going into the opener. I'm not going to lie to you. I thought defensive line would be the spot where I would be most concerned. I know that some of the reports that are coming out is basically that the defensive line, you're looking really good on the edges. You really need someone to step up in the middle, though. I don't think it matters. I don't think it compares to where this offensive line is. You have questions on the interior of the unit just because you've lost 2 significant starters there. You've got a guy that can barely even snap the ball to your quarterbacks in the shotgun. And you've got one offensive tackle spot that's being held down by a true freshman that just got here back in the summer. And the other spot being held down by a guy in Ja'Kai Moore who has been as inconsistent of a pass protector and as inconsistent of a run blocker really across the board, just inconsistent. The most inconsistent lineman that Carolina probably brought in from the transfer portal this year, that's looking like he's going to be starting for Carolina in the opener. So it is absolutely crazy along the offensive line. But here are some of the other notes that are coming out of camp. This one, not shocking at all. Gio Lopez continues to get closer to winning the starting job. It hasn't been made official. I'm kind of interested to see where you stand on this. At this point, I'm kind of in the camp of I don't think they're going to make an announcement. I think we're going to get to the first game of the season. Gio Lopez is going to be the starter out there, and he's going to be the guy for Carolina no matter what really happens. I don't think they're going to be playing two quarterbacks. But I've gotten to the point now where I just don't see any way possible that Bill Belichick, a guy who has been so secretive, I mean, the only time he ever comments on players is if he is specifically asked about said player. I don't see any way that he's going to come out and just give you who his starting quarterback is going to be for that opener.
Yeah, you're going to play it close to the chest, make TCU have to prepare for both guys. But that staff's smart. I think they know that Gio Lopez is going to be the guy, more likely than not, that takes the snaps for Carolina against them. But yes, that's where I am as well. I think Gio Lopez is going to be the starter. I just don't think Carolina's going to make a big to-do about it. Like we've seen around the country this week, whether it's been Tennessee named Joey Aguilar their quarterback. I know Notre Dame settled on their quarterback competition. Depending on certain programs that have had competitions, they've made it known, public statement, a press conference, a graphic on media, whatever it is. That's not going to be the way Carolina does it, that's not what I expect them to do. At least I think it'll just be, you'll find out when Jones Angell reads the starting offense. When we're all in Kenan Stadium next Monday night. And I'm still expecting that to be Gio Lopez, pretty much like I've been since they went and got him in the transfer portal, man. Like you went and got him, you invested, significant money in him with over $2 million. And really ever since then, my mindset went from Bryce Baker being the starter to Gio Lopez being the starter. They wanted to make him work for, they wanted to make him earn it. They kind of really set the tone of the competition culture they want to have within their program. But I think we're getting to the point where I thought we were going to be all along, was that Gio Lopez would be this team starting quarterback. I love that Max Johnson is even able to be on the field and even was in a position to where the staff felt comfortable, making him kind of earn the right to start over him. But that's a win in and of itself for Max Johnson. But I do think when it's all said and done, Gio Lopez will be our quarterback. And the more that we watch him, the more that we hear about him, the more we like him. And I think he's poised to have a breakout season in Chapel Hill and in the ACC.
Yeah, I think it's the right move for sure. I think this is the guy with the most arm talent in the room right now. I think there is certainly going to be some upside conversations in future years moving down the line when it comes to Bryce Baker, if he's still with Carolina, eventually when Travis Burgess gets in there. But for this year, between the two quarterbacks that are battling, I think Gio Lopez gives you the higher upside. He's going to be able to do things with his legs that Max Johnson isn't going to be able to do in terms of running the football. He's certainly going to be able to do things in the passing game that I just don't know if you're going to see from Max Johnson. This guy gives me, the more I watch him, he gives me Sam Howell vibes. And I'm not saying that he's going to be as productive as Sam, but in terms of the way that he plays, the tough-nosed mentality that he plays with, some of the throws that he's able to make at the intermediate and deep levels, I think this is a guy that is going to be able to carry Carolina's offense as we get later and later into the season. Early in the year, I think he might be adjusting to this level. But I do think that as the year goes along, he's going to become more comfortable. He's got that upside that I don't think is there necessarily for Max Johnson. We know what Max Johnson is. Gio Lopez is only a sophomore. There's room for him to grow. So I think you're going to see him really progress as the season goes along and have Carolina, being able to move the football consistently up and down the field towards the end of the season. Now, early in the season, he may have to lean on his backfield, and we've talked about it. We know that Davian Goss is going to be the starter for Carolina, but behind him, there are some question marks as to who is going to be the guy. I thought it was pretty clear that it was going to be Caleb Hood, but there is a guy that is having a tremendous camp that looks like he is pushing to be the backup for Carolina, and that is Michigan transfer Benjamin Hall. Shouldn't really be all that shocking. He was a dynamic player coming out of the high school level. There's a reason why he ended up at Michigan. But really didn't do a whole lot when he was with Michigan. And I thought being behind the offensive lines that Michigan has had, he would have been able to do more. But maybe it just wasn't a great fit in that system for him. He is apparently one of the stars so far of camp, really a guy that's standing out. Taylor Vippolis tweeted that he was one of the guys that was really making waves for Carolina, especially at that running back spot. And so we've gotten to a point now where there's a good chance that when we take the field for the game against TCU, it's Davian Goss handling the first team carries, and then right behind him, rotating in there, Benjamin Hall will be seeing some significant carries as well.
Yeah, and when we did our running back preview, we talked about how he could emerge maybe as the season moved along, as he got familiar with the offense, because you don't end up as a running back at Michigan playing for, at the time, Jim Harbaugh by accident. And of course, it doesn't work out. He transfers. He winds up here at Carolina. It doesn't look like it's taken us to get into the season for him to at least carve out a bigger role the first month of the year than maybe we anticipated going into the season. We maybe talked about maybe Carolina's team and what they're going to want to do, which we're not exactly sure what that's still going to look like just yet. But maybe it'd be a better fit in Chapel Hill than it was up in Ann Arbor. And if the first 2 weeks of fall camp are any indication, that's going to be the case. On the surface, you hate this for Caleb Hood, just because this is a guy that's been through a lot, has stuck around, has put his body on the line every single year to try to be whatever Carolina needs him to be. And more often than not, his body has failed him. I do think this is a good sign for the direction of the running back room overall. I think Benjamin Hall is a much more gifted football player. There's more talent. There's more upside to him. And so if you get him on the field and you fight for him, I think it's the better thing for Carolina's offense. Because, I think if you could really develop a 1-2 punch in that backfield and not just rely on Davian Goss to have to tote the ball, 25 plus times every single week, that'll go a long ways for Carolina. Being able to have two running backs. We saw how it made their offense so explosive when you had, Javonte Williams and Michael Carter. I'm not saying that's what this is going to be, but, that was when Phil Longo's offense really hit its stride, because they could run it whenever they wanted to. They could throw it whenever they wanted to. If you got two backs that you feel comfortable can get you 5 yards time they touch the football, that makes play calling a lot easier for Freddie Kitchens. Makes just playing the quarterback position that much easier for Gio Lopez. So I think it's a good sign for that running back room overall that Benjamin Hall is emerging, because I do think he has a better chance of being a legitimate 1-2 punch with Davian Goss than Caleb Hood did.
Well, and the other thing is, it's just like the quarterback room. It's what we just talked about there. You want Benjamin Hall to emerge because he's a guy that's going to be there for a few more years moving forward. Caleb Hood's done after this year. And I love Caleb Hood, man. I think that kid has laid it out on the line for Carolina his entire career, as you said. I mean, remember last year in the bowl game, they get to a point where we need some solution at quarterback. He steps up and says, I'm a guy that's capable of playing quarterback. Put me back there as the Wildcat quarterback. I'm able to throw it too. He ends up, thriving in that role. Carolina actually gets some sort of offense going in the bowl game against UConn. It wasn't enough to ultimately win the game because they went to it a little too late in the game. But still, I thought, that showed that he is a guy that is willing to do just about anything for this program. And then he sticks around through Bill Belichick, taking over and the coaching transition, everything like that. I think that there is still going to be a role for him on this roster. There is still going to be a chance for him to make some sort of contribution for Carolina, because all that has to happen is one of those guys gets banged up. And all of a sudden, he's the next guy up, because I don't think anybody else has jumped him in the pecking order. But Benjamin Hall is a guy that is going to be a staple of the Carolina backfield, you're hoping, for the next few years to come, alongside of Davian Goss. And if he can show you what he showed you at the high school level, then I think he is certainly more than capable of being a significant part of that backfield for Carolina. Now, there is one other guy that has stepped up in that room. That is Jalen McGill, the true freshman, a guy that was actually a part of the 2027 recruiting class, reclassified to the, 2026 recruiting class, reclassified to the 2025 recruiting class, and is making some waves here early on for Carolina. Apparently the staff really likes what they've seen from him so far, and they're hoping that this is going to eventually amount to him potentially getting some carries, maybe in a blowout game later on this season. Or, Richmond early in the year potentially provides that opportunity. So, I mean, even if this is a guy that ends up redshirting, the fact that he is already impressing, I think, is a really, really good sign for the future of this running back room, which he might be the leading guy in that room when you look at guys like Damon June Jr. And some of those other guys that are in the backfield with him.
And one of the cool things about it is he could still redshirt, but Carolina could put him in 4 games and figure out, what he's capable of, what his strengths are, but where he could really look to improve going into next year. So I think that's one of the best rules that the NCAA has maybe ever instituted, was that new redshirt rule that came around a handful of years, because it offers guys like this who maybe emerge in training camp, but are just because of the situation. There's not, unless Carolina's room just gets depleted by injury, is never going to have a significant role, but they could still play him in 4 games, but he doesn't lose a year of eligibility, but is now set up, in the years to come to be a difference maker, could really learn the offense, learn how Bill Belichick wants him to prepare, during game week, but in the offseason, get his body, as you mentioned, because he reclassified, so get his body even more ready to withstand the pounding that the running back position withstands, even at the college level. Those guys take a pounding because at college, they don't care about what you do in the pros. They're worried about you. And that's why you see a lot of running backs, when they get to the NFL, they're already worn out because they tote the rock 30, 35 times. Not saying he's going to become that, but he'll just be more acclimated to what's expected of him. So I like seeing, these kind of stories emerge. I think it's a good sign that, Carolina is able to coach these kids up. It's a good sign for the staff that they're bringing guys in on the, whether it was a short turnaround or not, but they're getting them coached up and ready to go. And these guys are the future of the program. And the fact that they're already emerging in their first training camp under Bill Belichick is a good sign of things to come if he stays here for 3 to 5 years. These guys, you would imagine, could be all conference caliber players by the time their careers come to an end.
Yeah, Damon June in the spring, Jalen McGill here in the fall, the names to know at the running back spot that have been stepping up. One more storyline to get here, and then we'll get out of here. Alex Taylor was up on the stand yesterday talking to the media for the first time this fall. Him along with Andrew Simpson were up there. Simpson, not a shocker. Alex Taylor, not going to say a shocker, but certainly notable because he's a guy that isn't expected to start at wide receiver. But Bill Belichick, talking about him, called him a versatile and dependable wide receiver. And, it would make you believe that the fact that they put him up on the media stand, the fact that Belichick is saying the stuff that he's saying about him, he has taken a step here in fall camp. And so now the question is just how big of a part can he become in this rotation in the wide receiver room? We know that Jordan Shipp is going to be a starter for Carolina. We know that Kobe Paysor is going to be a starter for Carolina. And then we expect that Isaiah Johnson is going to be the other starter. But I'm going to tell you, Alex Taylor, I talked about it, how when I saw him coming out of high school, he was in the same class as Jordan Shipp. And I said that he was the most complete of the receivers that Carolina had in that class. Jordan Shipp is a pretty complete receiver. And I think you see, if you go back to his high school tape, even more from Alex Taylor in certain instances. I think especially on those 50-50 balls, that's an area where Alex Taylor could shine. But he can do so many different things. You can throw him in the slot if you needed to. He's got the route running ability to be able to thrive there. You can put him on the outside because I do think that he's a guy that can handle, especially with the way that he's built, handle some of those tougher catches for Carolina, go up and get the football for them. I think this is a guy that we will be talking about as the year goes along, and his role, I think, will only grow as the season progresses. Might not play a massive role for Carolina in that first game against TCU, but especially if guys like Kobe Pasour, struggle the way that he did towards the end of last season to produce. Same thing with Chris Culliver. This could be a guy that steps in there and takes over some of those spots, some of those snaps, and ends up becoming a significant part of Carolina's wide receiving core.
What we like as fans is the versatility. What's going to get him on the field is his dependability. And that was the second word that Bill Belichick used to describe him. And we know whenever you hear Belichick mic'd up and he's talking to his team or he's talking about his team, he always talks about being able to be a player that your teammates can depend on. And that as much as anything is the quickest way to play for Bill Belichick. And have a role that's consistent under him from week to week. And we've kind of highlighted and talked about, like, for you to get the media treatment, that's a badge of honor for this coaching staff. They're not just going to put anybody up there. You've got to, quite frankly, you've got to earn the right to talk to the media is the way Belichick views it. Whereas, in years past, you just really put the big marquee names up there that most people want to hear speak. But Alex Taylor is maybe going to emerge as that guy, because I think his role. No, is he going to start? No. Could he be in that second wave of wide receivers though that gets action, that gets playing time and meaningful games against the TCU, against the Clemson? I think this is where you talk about, can you put Charlotte away early? Can you put Richmond away early to get him on the field and really figure out just kind of what he can and what he cannot do, where he fits best, which route concepts are his strengths, his weaknesses. But I think just the fact that he's already earned the trust from Belichick to be put up there behind the podium, that means he's doing the right stuff in practice. That means he's doing the right stuff in terms of being prepared to be the best player he can be, which will get him on the football field in some capacity. It's not going to be, I would say 40 snaps in week one. It might just be, anywhere from 5 to 10, but those are going to be impactful snaps. And the fact that, whenever he's in there, there's going to be the same level of trust with the starter goes a long way, because that's something that we talked about in the Mac Brown's era. There was a drop-off when you went to your backups. That's something that Belichick is going to try to fix. I think Alex Taylor is one of those guys that when he's on the field, Carolina's not going to change what they're trying to do, because they trust him to, whether it's make a block or run the route to get himself or someone else open, he's going to do that. So another, I think, cool story emerging here out of this training camp is a guy that we know there was a bunch of potential for this room, and we were looking for guys to emerge behind those first initial top three guys, and it appears that Alex Taylor's taken the bull by the horns and is ready to be a part of this offense in one way or another this season.
Yeah, I'm not going to say I'm shocked, because I thought he was one of those guys that really fit that role perfectly, of being able to slot in there right behind Jordan Shipp and be his backup. I think he's a guy that's going to find his way onto the field, though. And we've learned, if there's anything that we've learned from the Carolina Panthers watching them and from other teams around the NFL, your fourth wide receiver can be pretty valuable for you. He's going to be a guy that's going to be counted on at times to get snaps. And I said it, if other guys struggle and don't produce, then Carolina will turn to him at some point at wide receiver. If he's a guy that's there, that's working hard, that's making the plays that he has to in practice, and is being talked about as a dependable player, somebody that the quarterbacks trust, well, then there's going to be times where he's going to be on the field. So I don't expect a massive season from him. Don't think this is going to be, his breakout year where all of a sudden we're going to be talking about him with 500-600 receiving yards or anything like that. But I could see him being a guy that towards the end of the season really starts to play more significant reps for Carolina and gets him sort of prepared for next year to be a key contributor for this Tar Heel team, maybe as a starter. That's the point that you're hoping that he gets to for Carolina this year. So that wraps it up for this edition of the show, guys. Make sure you head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. We've got all the coverage that you guys need. Talking about Christo Kelly's injury, we do have an article up there about that. The article on Peter Pasansky will be going up for you guys at some point later on tonight or tomorrow. Just really depends, because I am going to put up the press conference takeaways from Bill Belichick that I wrote up earlier today. Put that up tonight so that you guys can check that out. So Pasansky might be going up tomorrow. That'll detail a little bit more about him for you guys as he makes that transition from the defensive line to the offensive line. And of course, any other news that comes out around Tar Heel football, once it officially comes out, we will have that covered for you on the website at HeelToughBlog.com. Meanwhile, with the podcast, we're getting you ready for the start of the season. Of course, we still have the breakout edition of the podcast, breakout players for this season that we'll do for you guys. And then, we're going to continue to get you guys ready with any other news and notes that comes out around camp. And then that quickly, it's going to be time to preview the game against TCU, and we'll be rolling out a whole bunch of new stuff for that. So make sure that you guys are sticking around, keeping an eye on the social medias for all that kind of stuff as well. So plenty of great stuff that is on the horizon for you guys to be able to check out on the podcast side of things as well. Make sure you head over to the YouTube page. Give us a subscription over there. Watch the videos that are over there. We have the position previews, the breakdowns of the specific players, all that stuff that's up there for you guys. So make sure you go back and check that out. And if you guys missed our position previews, there is a special edition of the podcast that will be running on Saturday. It's going to be about a 6-hour edition of the podcast, which is just going to string together every single position preview from this year. Basically a marathon version of the podcast for you guys, where we go through every position group. Now, again, those were filmed earlier, so some of the stuff in there is a little bit different, but it'll get you familiar at least with all of the names in each of these rooms. We'll talk more in depth about some of the guys that we're talking about. Of course, Aiden Buchanan, not a guy that you'll hear us talking about when we talk about the offensive line, but that's why you can come back to this edition of the podcast and watch it here. And of course, we'll be talking more about those guys as we get to the start of the season. We're also on the podcast side of things. One of the other additions that I'm going to sneak in there before the start of the year is our official prediction. So we do like bold predictions and stuff like that, but when it comes to predicting the schedule, we usually do that early in the spring when the schedule comes out, usually during the wintertime, what we think. And then we kind of update you throughout the year on where we stand. But we'll go through and actually predict the schedule for you guys, one more time before the season starts, give you our official record predictions for the year. So keep an eye out for that edition of the podcast as well. That could be alongside of the breakout players. Not sure exactly how we're going to do that edition of the podcast, but we will make sure that we get that up there for you guys. On the basketball side of things, still waiting on clearance for Luka Bogovac from the NCAA. Does that come down soon? Who knows? We'll see. Regardless, we'll have you covered on the website, HeelToughBlog.com. And of course, there are some important official visits that start this weekend for Carolina on the basketball side of things. So Josh will have you covered with all that. Any news that comes out around those recruiting prospects, we will have you covered over on the website and on the Four Corners podcast, where you can find in the same places that you find this podcast, on the YouTube channel, on the Facebook page, on the Twitter page, and of course, wherever you get your podcast. So that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.